Hello, I'm Professor David Ray from the Montfort University in Leicester in the United Kingdom. This video is about intercultural creativity in entrepreneurial placemaking, and I'll explain what that means. The structure of the video is as follows, that I'm going to provide you with some questions for you to think about during the film and then afterwards. I'm going to explain what intercultural creativity in entrepreneurial placemaking is all about. We're going to look at the case of the city of Leicester in the United Kingdom. We'll have a discussion around that, and then I'll provide some conclusions. Okay, so the approach of the video is to explore how different cultures work together and how microcultural and intercultural entrepreneurship contributes to the cultural economy of a city or a place, and this can apply anywhere in the world. We illustrate how value is created, not just financial, but cultural, spiritual, heritage, social and environmental value is created through entrepreneurship within and between different micro and macro cultures. And we develop a conceptual framework for micro and intercultural entrepreneurship. This suggests how processes of learning, interaction and cultural exchanges enable intercultural understanding, shape entrepreneurial behaviours across cultural boundaries, and enhance cultural and economic value and innovation. So here are some questions for you to think about during the film and afterwards. Firstly, what do you understand as culture in this context? What does culture mean to you? Secondly, how would you describe your own cultural identity? Where does it come from? How was this culture created? What do you think intercultural enterprises are? Can you think of an example of an intercultural enterprise? How do these intercultural enterprises emerge? And finally, how does intercultural enterprise benefit communities? Maybe I'd like to think of your own community as an example. So I'm using some long words like intercultural and entrepreneurship. Let's just define a few of these terms. What do we mean? By culture, I mean the shared identity, the heritage and values and practices of a discrete community or a group. This may be based on nationality, ethnicity, language, faith group, shared interests, or other factors. A microculture is a small, recognisably definable group, maybe within that culture, or a microculture may even span more than one culture. And they're identified by a specific combination of their characteristics. Intracultural entrepreneurship is a business activity targeted within its own cultural group. So we might think of people from Sri Lanka, for example, one quite small cultural group opening a Sri Lankan restaurant. It's limited to that group. But what if they can't attract enough diners, enough customers to survive? The market is just too small. It makes sense for them to widen their market for employees, investors, suppliers and distributors working across boundaries beyond a single microculture. They become intercultural, and that starts to change everything. That's what we're interested in, this intercultural entrepreneurship. So here we have a photograph of the Leicester Caribbean Festival, one cultural group within Leicester, and the characteristics of any cultural group, of their identity, who we are, our values, what is important to us, our spirituality, what we believe in, our heritage of history, stories and traditions are both good and bad. The locus is the term I use to call the place or places we call home, and that can be Leicester, and it can be another country that perhaps our ancestors came from. And then the social network, that's very important. Social networks usually start with families. Institutions such as schools, churches or faith groups, communities and groups and networks. It's the social glue that bonds the culture together. And then all of the cultural practices that we experience in growing up, education, maybe around marriage or working, employment, kind of careers that people take up or encouraged or discouraged from taking up, and maybe businesses that they might start up through self-employment and entrepreneurship, the kind of celebrations and events that take place in the community with the food, the music, the clothing, the fashions, everything that goes along with those events, and the kind of products and services and demand and opportunities that those provide for businesses. So we cut now to the story of Leicester. Now, the city of Leicester, we're going back 50 years to 1972. Leicester was a rather grey city in the Midlands, a manufacturing city. The main products were making socks and making underwear, believe it or not, and printing the boxes and the labels that went on those products to ship them everywhere else in the world. So it was a white culture, very monocultural, very English, quite working class, dominated by probably football, beer, fish and chips, and a band called Shawadi at the time, which was a Leicester band, but quite limited in its cultural diversity. And then in 1972, a big event, the Ugandan Asians, as they were called, arrived. So in 1972, this Indian ethnic community in Uganda in East Africa was expelled by the tyrant Idi Amin. But these people ran the business and professional life of Uganda. We see people here on the tarmac at Stansted Airport, as it was then. No one looks their best when they've just come off an 8-hour plane journey. Many of these people held British overseas citizenship. They were able to come to Britain. Leicester was the top destination for them because they joined Indian people who were already living there. But they had to start again with the houses and jobs that they could find. But they brought their skills and they brought their culture with them, and that's important. So Leicester is now a home for many cultures. 50 years on from the arrival of the Ugandan Asians, the Indian communities who are here, they have made a huge difference to Leicester by making it their home and starting many, many businesses in many different sectors. And they've been joined by other groups over the last half century, making Leicester a world city with a unique creative culture for its size. These include people from African countries, the Caribbean, Pakistan and Bangladesh, Middle Eastern countries, China, as well as countries right across Europe from west to east and north to south. So we're going to have a discussion now about how Leicester's creative culture has developed, and I'm joined by Shivani Himanshu Ganatra, who is a student studying textile design at De Montfort University. Hi Shivani, thank you for joining me. We're talking about Leicester as a creative city and the different cultures that we find in Leicester. Tell me about your story. How did your family first come to Leicester?
Well, hi David, thank you for having me. So my family originally came from Leicester several years ago actually. My mum came here when she was 12 years old. In the hopes of a better future, she came with her family. And her dad was sponsored by a shop called Jaipur Millers so that she could, legally stay in this country. And she's been here ever since, and that's where she met my dad. And
where did they come from before that?
Oh, so originally both of my parents came from India. Both of them are of a Gujarati origin, although my dad lived in Mumbai, which is actually the Maharashtrian origin. And my mum came from Jamnagar, which is in Gujarat.
And you've grown up in Leicester all your life?
Yes, I have. I've always been in Leicester. It's my hometown. Although I've been to India many, many times, and I speak the language Gujarati quite fluently. Great. Although I would say English is my best language.
Yeah. So what's it like growing up in an Indian culture in Britain, in Leicester?
Oh, good question. Growing up as an Indian means that you have the access to so many of the delicious foods, cuisines, festivals, dresses, and you have the privileges of living in a first world country when you live in England. So I had never felt like I was out of touch with my culture. I've always been a very Indian girl. I knew who Priyanka Chopra was before Nick Jonas was, and so being Indian makes up the majority of who I am. And because I'm a Hindu, a lot of my beliefs come from that. So for instance, I'm a vegetarian as well.
And you're studying textile design now, so tell me about, how did your interest in textiles and fabrics and clothing and fashion, where did that come from?
Well, originally, because of my culture, a more academic route was pushed towards me. So I was originally studying a science route, but I'd always been good with art and drawing, and I'd always had a love for fashion and beading and extravagance. So I feel like it was only inevitable for me to move to textile design when I dropped out of my first university. And I think having that knowledge of certain embroidery techniques, for instance, that really did help. And having the love for opulence and beading and excessiveness, which is very Indian in Indian clothing. So
do you feel you're much more able to express your kind of the creative side of your personality through what you're doing now?
Oh, definitely, definitely. Everything that I produce and I make, I would say is a part of my soul. Like all of my creations, all of my textile designs, they come from my soul. Nothing I design isn't something I wouldn't wear, I wouldn't buy. And it's very inspired by my own personal tastes and my Indian culture.
Yeah, so tell me about one of your design projects.
So one of my design projects was actually in my second year, and it was one of my final projects of my second year, which was my Rajasthani project. And that project, I had used specific techniques that were endangered. Actually, they were artisan techniques that were at risk of running out. So for instance, that technique was the shisha embroidery technique, and which involves sewing around mirrors and creating mirror designs. That technique I used in my work, and I added my own twist by adding colours that I actually preferred, so like pastels and stuff, to bring a more contemporary twist to it. And I would say that was probably one of my most successful modules, because I brought something that was a part of my culture across.
So you're blending traditional designs and approaches with more modern contemporary materials.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Like traditionally very reds and greens and everything would be used, and right now in India actually there is more of a trend for pastels, so I'm trying to bring that across as well.
Yeah. So we're here this week on a creative entrepreneurship program in Sakarya University in Turkey. Do you have any thoughts about your future career? What you'd like to do with the creative skills that you're developing?
Oh, I learned a lot about loads of things. I learned a lot about teamwork and cooperating, learning about different people and learning about different ethnicities that I've never known before. I think that alone is an experience in itself, because when you've communicated with loads of different people, you know you can make yourself adapt to each and every situation, if that makes sense, because you're making yourself change to appeal to everyone. And I think that's beneficial in any business sense, like especially with working in different countries. You could be like, oh, I know this Scandinavian friend or something, and that could even become a network. You never know.
How do you think that could shape your future career? Do you have any thoughts about maybe your own business, or being an independent designer, or anything like that in the future?
Oh, personally, I actually wanted to create my own stationery line, and that is my dream. I love stationery, I always have, and then eventually my own clothing line. I think knowing different people from different backgrounds, if they have contacts or anybody I could like communicate with, maybe I could, like, you know, maybe gain an internship somewhere. You never know. The world is a big place.
Yeah, it sounds like you could work towards being a creative entrepreneur of the future.
Oh, definitely. That's the aim.
That's great, Shivani. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, in the final section of this video, we're going to look at a little theoretical model to help us make sense of intercultural entrepreneurship, and then some final observations. So you can see that we can kind of map culture as being the macro culture, if you like, the national English, British culture at a political, constitutional, corporate and business norms, the way things are done in Britain, if you like, particularly in England. The meso culture is the bit in the middle. We can think of that as being Leicester. The dominant culture in Leicester 50 years ago, very much white, English, working class. The institutions would tend to reflect that. And the microcultures, again, being English, working class, middle class, and not very much diversity at that stage, with groups having a very common identity, heritage, seeing Leicester as their locus, their home, the discourse, the cultural practices being quite homogenous. But as that changes, as new groups move into Leicester, as people start businesses, we find entrepreneurship comes in, people looking to create value in various ways, to attract and create value, to share that value, retain and distribute it within their communities. It's enabled by their cultural leadership, community organisation, institutional agency, their ability to get things done, and digital diffusion. And we see here the way in which these diverse microcultures not only trade within their own cultures, but increasingly they work in intercultural ways. So they're working between the different microcultural groups, the Indian, Hindu, the Muslim, the African groups, the Eastern European groups and others. And that changes not only the meso, the city level culture, but also the national culture as well. So intercultural entrepreneurship is a dynamic set of factors which are transforming the city economy. We can see here Leicester's Mela 2019, the Indian Film Festival, and ways in which intercultural entrepreneurship is transforming the economy, the city, the cultural life, the employment, but also the festivals and the range of creative and cultural businesses which are growing. And we see here some examples of the vibrant Leicester startup scene, the business accelerators, and the diverse range of business startups, creative entrepreneurs, creative producers who are emerging from both universities and from the local community. So in closing, some thoughts about intercultural entrepreneurship, that microcultural and especially intercultural entrepreneurship, they express a long present phenomenon in human development and civilization. We like to travel, we like to migrate, go and work and live in new places, share their cultures, but we bring something new. We bring our own influences as well. Microcultural creative expression is a wellspring for the flow of new ideas, for new fashion ideas, new music, new art, new film, new tastes in food culture. We look to microcultures and intercultural working where these new exciting new combinations are coming from. So intercultural entrepreneurship is where we co-create and we have cultural exchanges between communities which attract wider audiences. It's about creating and sharing creative and economic value between those communities, producing a shared cultural capital and reaching wider market opportunities. And it's also about a shared social learning, connecting entrepreneurial values and practices of these different groups and developing the bridging skills for co-working between them. Intercultural entrepreneurship contributes to creative placemaking, and we can see that in the case of not only Leicester City but many other places as well. The cultural enterprises and events are the roots of placemaking, which invest a locus, a city or a place with a symbolic and shared value of what makes that place a special place for the cultures who live there and for other people to visit and experience it. So it provides the locus for people to meet and share their cultural experiences, and that also provides a market for many other cultural businesses as well. So it attracts new creative producers, entrepreneurs, organisers, sources of finance, institutional support, and of course media as well. We can see Leicester was re-energised, transformed through intercultural entrepreneurship over the past 50 years, which created a unique new international identity. And this has contributed positively towards social inclusion, community cohesion, shared resilience towards adverse influences such as the prolonged lockdown in the COVID pandemic. So I'm going to close with some recommendations for intercultural entrepreneurship, which enhances social integration, cultural relations, and new forms of entrepreneurial activity. Education needs to reflect that interculturality by changing the nature, the values, the approach, the pedagogical stance of the learning process, how people learn, responding to diverse and international students' expectations of what they want to experience. Intercultural entrepreneurship can be a civil society's response to some of the international trends of nationalism, autocracy, racism, denial of minority rights that unfortunately that we see. The city can be a special place, a safe place, and intercultural entrepreneurship can shape the unique global branding of a city or a place, demonstrating its international cultural and political capital and impact. We look at Leicester as an example of that. So thank you for watching this video. If you're interested, we have some references, some further reading that you may be interested in pursuing, and just as an academic note, some points on the conceptual foundations of microcultural and intercultural enterprise that you'll be able to see in the slide deck. Thank you for watching.